Welcome friends, welcome to the class of international business. So, in the last lecture we are discussing about the role of marketing research in international business. When you talk about marketing research or research for that international business, it becomes very important because the marketer today is trying to get into a new place, new country altogether, and the local knowledge is very limited, right. So, in such a condition it becomes very imperative, it becomes imperative for the marketer or the the company to understand the local culture, the dialect, the tradition, the habits, the income condition of the people, the spending habits, everything, right. So, we discussed that it is very important that there need to be research done on the price, the how to promote the product, what should be the distribution, the most effective distribution method that should be adopted, how should the company segment the market, and how should they, what kind of products they should manufacture for the market. It is not that any product would be selling in the market, because the local people might not like a particular design which is all, but maybe very successful in another market. So, it is not necessary, that is very important. And when we discussed about the product research, we also discussed that it is not only about design, the product has to be, the concept has to be properly developed and tested, and then it has to be properly test marketed, so that you, before you go into commercialization, the firm should not make a mistake, they should not get into a trouble, because once it happens that you get into commercialization and you launch it, then it is very difficult to back out. Now, when you get into a new market, how do you estimate the demand? The point is, this is a very important point. How do you estimate the market demand? Because estimating the demand, if one does not estimate the demand properly, then it becomes a real challenge, right. So, many companies for that, they have become obsolete from the market, just because they could not estimate the demand properly, right. So, there have been very successful cases in the past where companies they did not manage their inventories well, they did not forecast the markets well, and when, suppose for example, when the tire industry, in that among the tire, when radial tires came into place into the market, there were some of the then existing players who were very successful, but they just went out of the market, they became bust, and companies like Michelin became very successful, because they could adjust to the new changes, the needs of the market. So, companies who are continuously adjusting and adapting to the market, they have been doing well and they have been always successful. So, be it national or international, home or the outside market, and it is especially important in the outside market, because demand forecasting or estimation becomes little tougher because of your lack of local knowledge. So, when you do a estimating, when you go for a estimation of the market demand, how does the marketer go for it, right. So, when you talk about market forecast, right. So, as I said, it is very important that the firms understand it, and it is especially important in the international business, because you are getting into new places, new countries where local knowledge is not there. So, there are 4 steps. The first step, it says, is define the market, right. So, what it is saying, what does define the market mean? Define the market means include all potential end users and identify the appropriate drivers of demand and reduce the risk of surprise product substitutions. Now, what do I mean by that? When you define the market, so a manufacturer, suppose for example, you are a manufacturer of, somebody is a manufacturer of let us say calculators. Now, the question is, with time, calculator has been very slowly, the demand for calculators went out, because today mobiles have got everything in them. For example, the calendars, just imagine somebody was making calendars. Now, what is the use of calendars? Even tomorrow, what would happen to the watch industry? Will it get a big jolt from the mobile industry? Possible, because the mobile industry is the mobile watches, to the mobiles are giving you time, location, everything they are giving you perfectly. So, what will happen? Will it be a trouble? So, how do you define the market? First, include all the potential end users who will maybe buy a product, and then see what would be the impact if a new product substitution comes into place. If tomorrow let us say even mobiles are substituted with something else, then what would happen to the mobile industry. So, all this is very important when somebody gets into a demand estimation. So, demand does not mean only the finding the number, also to look into the short term and long term vision and future of the product. Second is to divide the total industry demand into its main components, right. So, dividing the total industry demand into its major components. So, the major components are everything for which can take a place for one product, for one product taking place for another, right. For example, of cars. So, what are the different components required, and accordingly the marketers can judge how many different units of this product would be required. If suppose cars are manufactured and this number of cars are manufactured, how many tires would be required, how many lights would be required, how many different components would be required, and among them again, among the tires how many different substitutes are available, among the engines how many different substitutes are available. So, everything has to be taken together. Then third point is to forecast the drivers of demand in each segment and project how they are likely to change by, for example, with the use of regression and other statistical techniques, right. So, you have to calculate the demand in each segment. So, you have said through marketing we have understood that segmentation is very important. So, you have created the segment now and you have found out the target market. Now, whether the target market in your target how much demand would be there for your product, is it sufficient enough, is it is it worth enough to target that particular market, right. And for example, look at this when I talk about this case of forecasting the drivers of demand. So, this is a case forecasting total demand became crucial for a company that was thinking about acquiring a maker of video games. So, there was a company X which was thinking of acquiring a maker of video games. Many thought that the low overall market penetration, 10% of US households only at that time, signified a lot of room. Obviously, anybody would think, right, only 10% penetration is there, so 90% an opportunity is there. Signified a lot of room for growth before the market became saturated, when about 50% of the households would have games. So, they thought there is a lot of potential. Using available data, however, the management team created categories based on family income and children's ages. The analysis made clear that the main target market, the upper income families with children, was already well penetrated. Okay. So, the company realized that the target market which they were thinking of is already well penetrated. Families with incomes exceeding $50,000 and children between the ages of 6 and 15 already were 75% penetrated. This finding convinced the management that demand would fall, and because these children will grow up, right, and they are not being properly replaced because that cohort is not getting replaced, and the proposed acquisition did not make sense. The dramatic decline in video game sales shortly thereafter confirmed the wisdom of this judgment. So, it becomes very important not only to estimate the numbers at the moment, but also to see the future of the product, right. The fourth point after the forecasting is the conducting the sensitivity analysis to understand the most critical assumptions and to gauge risks to the baseline forecast. Now, what we mean to say is when a marketer does a forecasting, he might be looking at only one single point, right. So, managers who rely on single point demand forecast, they run dangerous risks, right, but because the conditions might suddenly change. What if today you have forecasted and suddenly the government changes its tax policies, the ruling party may stay or not, that also could be a change. So, whatever if the political and economic condition is very volatile and is changing, how would it affect the entire forecast? So, some of the macroeconomic variables behind the forecast could be wrong, right, they might change, wrong in the sense they might change. In such a case, sensitivity analysis can be done by simply varying the assumptions, by manipulating the assumptions and quantifying their impact on the demand. So, by if I change the demand, if I change the independent variables, let us say, how would it change my final demand? So, companies, these are the 4 points which marketers have to keep in mind when they are doing a demand analysis. at least in the international business. So, traditionally forecasting methods, when you talk about, there are few methods, right. So, some of them could be just qualitative methods and some could be quantitative methods. So, when you look at the methods, there are like, for example, the executive opinion method, right. Now, what is an executive opinion method? A method where the people in the sales department, the people who are close to the customer, the people who are in the front line managers, they know better than others. Now, and then estimation is calculated from their perspective. So, after doing this, the company assumes what could be the future demand, right. Similarly, there is the Delphi method. Now, Delphi method is again a expert opinion method, right. Expert opinion method in the sense, the expert in a particular industry, for example, the FMCG industry, the consumer durable industry, the industrial marketing sector, whatever it is. Experts in that particular area, their opinion is taken, and this opinion is well drafted and measured, and then they try to foresee the future. Okay. For example, let us say tomorrow what would be the requirement of energy in the future in maybe 2040 or 2030. So, to make an analysis of this, you cannot approach, it is very difficult to quantitatively measure it. Sometimes qualitative measures are better in this condition. So, in such a condition, and people who are from this sector, for example, a senior employee from an NTPC or in India, or let us say Rural Electric Corporation, could be the better people who could give you a idea what is the energy requirement going to be. So, similarly, there are other techniques like time series projection, right, smoothing exponential, moving averages and trend projection methods. So, we will see some of them, right. For example, a simple moving average. Now, this is a quantitative method. What is done? Now, suppose there are 5 periods P1, P2, P3, P4 up to Pn, let us say whatever it is 5, there are 5 P5. So, you just take the last year sales of these 5 periods and divide it by 5, and that becomes the one for the 6th, right. And then for when you want to make it for the 7th, then you leave this and start from this P2, this becomes P1. So, 1, 2, 3, 4 and P5 or and P6 which you had. So, these 5 you add up and then you divide it by again 5. So, by that method you can simply understand the demand of the market, right. This is a very simple method. But then you have other methods also, for example, the weighted moving average calculation. Now, what it is saying? Now, in this method you see price into a weighting factor, the weight factor is multiplied, right, plus price of the previous period into weighting factor minus 1. So, assume prices of, let us say there are some of the prices, right, 90, 89, 88, 89. So, now when you talk about a weighted moving average, how it is calculated? There are the 4 period 1, 2, 3, 4. So, the base number is taken as 10, right. So, base number it is a random number. So, what you do is 90 into 4 by 10 plus 89 into 3 by 10. So, this is the latest, and this is the most furthest period, distant period, right. So, this is in terms of closeness, this is the first, second, third, fourth, right. So, 89 into 3 by 10 plus 88 into 2 by 10 plus 89 into 1 by 10. So, when you do this, so you get a value of 89.2. So, when you come to the 5th point, so here the sales would be 89.2 and you can carry on this method. So, this is another method. So, there are other methods, for example, smoothing exponential. Now, this is also largely used in forecasting and marketers use it very effectively. This method says a new forecast for today, let us say forecast for the today's period is equal to previous year's forecast Ft minus 1 plus At, which is your actual demand, this is the actual demand. So, last year's forecast, this is last year's forecast, actual demand last year, right, previous period's actual demand, and alpha. Alpha is a factor which ranges between 0 and 1, and the value when the higher the value of alpha, the most recent value is taken, right. So, it gives you an idea what is it is the most recent value that is taken. So, smoothing exponential also is a technique which is used for forecasting, right. Similarly, you have a regression which is a trend projection technique. So, in which y is my dependent variable and A plus B of x is where x is my independent variable and I keep in my B is my constant. So, I can have B1 x1 plus I can have B2 x2 plus B3 x3 goes on Bn xn. So, by doing this I can also forecast the previous the next coming futures demand, right. So, all this we have been trying to talk about is the the how global research, how research in the global sector is happening, how that can get affected, how product research has to be done, how demand estimation has to be done. But what are the major pitfalls when you talk about global research? What are the things that one needs to, what the marketer needs to keep in mind, the firm needs to keep in mind? The biggest problem when you talk about global research has been seen to be the fear of self reference criteria. Now, what is the self reference criteria? So, this is a criteria which says to judge others by referring to one's own culture, experience, knowledge, etc. Now, what does it mean? Suppose if I ask you, right, what would be the sales of motors, automobiles or two wheelers in let us say Pakistan, right. So, what generally a person does, or let us say a sales in let us say Malaysia. Okay. Now, if what a person generally does is that whatever he feels about the economy at the moment, let us say the global markets, say suppose he feels the market is going in a recession. So, he would say that he or she would say the market is not doing well, already 30%, 40% fall has been there. So, taking this cue what he feels in the home market, he would just extrapolate to the other markets, which is a biggest mistake that can ever happen and can be a serious disaster for international business. If nearly 100% of the population in Central America, now you see this case, if 100% of the population in Central America watches the nightly TV soap operas while enjoying a beverage from the fridge, right. What can be the assumption, not about the beverage I am asking, but about the demand for the electrical appliances like fridges. So, does a manufacturer like Whirlpool or Samsung, do they see a future in this? By just understanding that everybody in the night is using a beverage from the fridge. So, automatically that is a demand for the fridge. Now, one needs to be very careful, because in reality you see up to 35% of the households in Central America, they have no electricity, right, and most TVs are battery powered and refrigerators are gas powered. So, you tell me in such a condition, if a company does not have the ability to manufacture battery operated or powered and gas powered appliances, how could he sell the product? So, just looking at a statement or a case, one should not jump into a conclusion, right. So, self reference criteria is exactly this. So, one should not extrapolate its own thinking and try to see the future, that is wrong. There could be several issues when you talk about global research. For example, the language issues. How do you, what is the language you are using? How do you translate, right, from one language to the other? Generally what we do is we tend to translate a statement or a sentence, whatever we are thinking in our mother tongue, we try to translate it in another language. Actually that creates a very different meaning because of the change in grammar, because of the change in the the kind of usage of language. So, that is very dangerous sometimes, and it has been seen like many companies have fallen into a trap by this translation issues, right. Poor translation issues are not only a waste of money, but it also dents the brand image of a company, right. For example, there was a company which made a car and the name of the car was spelt in another market, that that something that does not move, the meaning came out. Now, suppose when you make such a disaster, right, then the brand name, the car's product name itself meant in that new culture, new country, that something that does not move. Why should anybody buy a car, right? Failure to adapt to the local markets and relying on only a set of data. So, that is very difficult and dangerous in global research. When you are doing a global research, you have to understand how to adapt to the local markets, and you cannot rely only one secondary source of data, because largely what we do is we rely on the secondary sources of data and we miss out on the primary sources. We do not because of lack of time and urgency, we do not do that. But then primary data gives you a much richer input what secondary data cannot maybe, because secondary data has been done by somebody else whose objective might have been very different, and more than that it might have some errors also, and the time frame and when it was done was also different. So, all these things may create a difficulty when you talk about global research, right. There are problems like multiplicity of markets. So, problems of numerous markets are well experienced in the overseas market research, right. Research project covers a number of foreign markets. This ultimately augments the cost and problem in the overseas market research. So, right. So, what it says, problems of numerous markets, for example, when Evan, when Evan entered into several markets, after that they realized that the catalog that they were manufacturing, that they were making, most of the products in the catalog, right, were not available in some of the markets, and because of this the people were getting confused or they were getting irritated, because they felt they were being sidelined, the products were being not made available for them. So, this is an important issue, one needs to be careful. Problems with secondary data, as I just mentioned, so it might be unreliable. Problems in collecting primary data, the buyer behavior of customers can vary from country to country, right. As people behave differently, collecting primary data from them is also comparatively very difficult, right. So, all this create a large issue of problems, right, for the marketers, and this that is why it becomes very important for the marketers to understand what kind of research issues can they face when they talk about international markets. Okay. So, and international business. So, with this I will just wind up today and we will continue from here in the next lecture. Okay. Thank you very much.